So Fletch completed a Bachelor of Engineering at University of Sydney and then went on to work for BHP Billiton in Western Australia for 6 years, where he dipped his toe in the startup waters briefly and then took a role as Regional Operations Manager with Uber. Then Fletch and his family moved to the UK, completed his MBA in 2018 at London Business School, and has been consulting to and working for a number of startups. So over to you, Fletch. Welcome and thank you.
Thanks, Ali. Yeah, Ali reached out and said, can you have a bit of a chat? And then reminded me that she also has incriminating photos of me, known Ali for quite a long time. So how could I refuse? Also, apologies for my hair. Last time I had a haircut was 2020, in between two lockdowns. And I'm due actually today. I'm very excited. Like today, going to get a haircut. And it's the little things in life that you miss when you've been in extended periods of lockdown. So I'm very glad to be here. I'm glad I reached out and happy to support. And I was just chatting to Ali, just sort of saying that, you know, the lockdown of here, because it's been persistent, has I think perhaps had maybe more of an impact. I'm not sure, right? Compared to Australia, where things have been a bit more business as usual. And like one of the key things I've seen over here is like the B2B sales it's all virtual now. Like there is no going to the client, and it works. Like I've consulted to a health tech, a B2B health tech company, and they've done all of their sales of all virtual. All their relationship building has all been virtual, and it's worked. A lot of software vendors now, it's all virtual. And I think that could potentially be a bit of a game changer for where people can be based and run startups and successfully, you know, have sales channels, particularly in the B2B space. So I think that's interesting. It'll be really interesting to see to what extent Australia embraces like that remote working. But it does work. It can be done. And I've certainly been living that for the last 12 months. So I'm going to share my screen because I've put together a little presentation. But as I was saying to Ali, like feel free to unmute and ask a question or ask for clarification. Like it's a pretty small group here, so we can be a little bit free form. I don't necessarily need to stick to the structure that I've outlined. Happy to just jam on some more ideas or any aspect that you're interested in, and yeah, just like let's just keep it pretty informal. And hopefully there's something that's useful or at least interesting here. All right, so I'm just going to go screen one. Okay, just give me a thumbs up if you can see Always Be Hustling. Can you see that? Yep, excellent. All right, thanks. So I've called this presentation Always Be Hustling, a scrappy journey through startup and scaling. And there'll be a little bit more on why that is in a minute. Let me just. So just a little bit about what we'll cover today. So a little bit about me. I'll just go through a bit about the Uber story, the kind of the chaos and fun of the early Uber days, the scrappiness of it, and how that was, in a sense, being lean, but without trying to be lean. And there's some of those lessons that we took away from, that I took away from the Uber experience. I'll dive into a little bit more about lean. For those who, I guess it'll be a high level overview and be more practically focused as opposed to the deep theory that goes behind lean. And technically, for those who are a bit more interested in the theory, it's also theory of constraints and how that applies to venture building. And then a little bit more, because I guess my experience is probably more tilted towards scaling than startup. So I'll talk a little bit about going beyond product market fit, getting to product market fit, and then what happens once you've got the product market fit. So I'll talk a little bit about that. But as I say, feel free to dive in, ask questions, say, I don't know what the hell you're talking about when you say product market fit, for example. Anything like that, just dive in and let me know. So just a little bit about me. Grew up in Brisbane, educated in Sydney, studied chemical engineering, geology, and geophysics, and then took myself over to Western Australia, the centre of the world for mining, and blew stuff up for a period of time. Had great fun sort of doing that. But I think my level of risk tolerance was probably a little bit higher than international mining companies. So I think I was always a little bit more towards innovation. Like I wanted to push the boundaries. I did get to work on some pretty cool tech projects. Got to work on driverless trucks. I got to work on radar systems, state-of-the-art radar systems, monitoring slopes. So I got to do some of that sort of stuff, but I was probably always destined to end up more towards tech scaling and startup world. My kind of side hustle during that time was volunteering with an organization called Engineers Without Borders. So I did a lot of that. And in that process, I witnessed a couple of things. One, they're consulting engineers, right? So the real technical experts seem to operate at about a 70% utilization rate for their people. So they had like 30% unused capacity, right? Fixed cost, like unused capacity. And as well, Australia has this really big not-for-profit and charity sector. And a lot of those charities and not-for-profits are very well, like they're professionally run. You know, they'll have members of their boards will be partners at PwC and the like. So, and then like Engineers Without Borders is a great organization. What it does is community building. So it's all about, you know, two-way knowledge sharing and long-term relationships and partnerships with communities to help, you know, bring or develop themselves in a sustainable way. But sometimes there are charities, well-run, like professionally run charities or not-for-profits that just need built environment work. They just need architecture, engineering work done for them. And there was no one facilitating at that time, certainly the connection between this underutilized capacity and these professional organizations, these professionally run charities. And so I was like, well, I could do something like that. So I built a marketplace for pro bono architecture, engineering, construction, right? But it was B2B, right? It was about connecting firms as opposed to individuals to charities to get some work done. And I described that journey as, you know, we got to what we call like problem solution fit, right? There's a problem that you know, these charities need built environment work done. So engineering, architecture, drawings, advice, that sort of work done from time to time. And every dollar that they don't have to spend on that work is a dollar that they get to spend delivering their core charitable purpose. And then of course you've got these, you know, large, you know, actually everything from small to medium to large engineering and architecture firms that have people that are underutilized, but and need to be developed or want to be developed, or they want to work on some cool projects. So they were, you know, quite keen to utilize that capacity. So you know, I built an MVP and started connecting these groups together, built this kind of marketplace, and that worked. Like we managed to facilitate, myself and a small team of engineers managed to facilitate about $75 million worth of projects.
Sweet.
Through the marketplace. But what we weren't able to get to is get from problem solution fit. So it's like we had some traction. People wanted to use this solution as a problem. And we managed to build a product that solved the problem. But the big thing is like, can you get to product market fit? Is there a market that's willing to pay for the solution? And in this case, the answer was no, right? It's just not to the extent that was going to support the ongoing running of the organization. So that was a good lesson in, you know, early traction is not necessarily indicative of a successful business model. Yeah, but the whole thing at least was good karma, and that we got to do a lot of really good work. We got to teach a lot of engineering firms about how to do pro bono. I got a lot of really good support from the legal industry, who've been doing pro bono in a very structured and strategic way for 3 or 4 decades now in Australia. But it was just, the market was either like not big enough, like there's a few kind of early adopters and innovators who were willing to see the value and pay for it, but not enough. It wasn't big enough to pay for it, the whole organization. And also just like the value was not clear enough for enough organizations to pay us for a subscription to this kind of model. But a good thing to do and a good thing to learn from. But just as sort of walking away from that, Uber turned up to Perth and said, "Hey, you seem to know something about logistics. You seem vaguely numerate, and you seem to know something about marketplaces. So why don't you build ours here?" And so I joined a small team, 4 of us, and we just had a blank check basically, just bang and go and build the marketplace. So I'll touch on that in a little bit more detail in a moment, but that was a great like stepping off point there. Worked there for a bit less than 2 years. Wish I could have joined earlier. I left, I think, at the right time for me, because it was at that point of switching from scaling to operating at scale, and that was a big switch in Uber's psychology and the nature of the business. And I wasn't ready personally for that. I wanted to go and find the next Uber. I wanted to go and explore the startup world. So I thought, oh, I'll use an MBA as an excuse to go over to the UK and Europe and explore the startup scene over there. So I went, did my MBA, focused on entrepreneurial management, entrepreneurial financing, and general management, and then I basically used that as an excuse to go knock on doors and inject myself into the world over there. Spent a lot of time in health tech. So I worked for like an AI health company called Ada, a company that thought it was AI called Humor. Worked in like a B2B company called Peppy, and a great like a sort of mixture of consulting and working in there. Helped them through various funding rounds. At Ada, I think while I was there, we raised €16.5 million. We raised about £10 million when we were at when I was at Humor. Peppy was a smaller one, earlier stage, raised a couple of million. So got to go through a lot of that process. Happy to talk more about that if that's an area that interests people. The slightly frustrating thing about health tech is it's very different to other forms of like health and finance. So like the two things where people like the psychology of the consumer is different to say buying a car or buying a piece of software. So it can be a bit frustrating and slow moving, particularly when you're dealing with the NHS. So I was quite happy to move out into more of a consumer-led space. I worked on a turnaround project for a global classified site. I worked on a scaling project for a card and gifting site, sort of e-commerce platform over here. And now I'm working on my own thing, which I can't talk about too much at the moment owing to some funding sensitivities, but hopefully soon I can maybe come back and talk to people about that. So that's why a little detour of or a little overall highlights of how I got to be here. So let's this is the early Uber. I think this is the interesting piece. It's kind of unique company in a lot of respects, and well publicized. Uber's culture was very strong and very deliberate, and had 14 cultural values, and one of them was always be hustling. And this is the description of what it means to always be hustling, right? So every cultural value had a description. And I remember reading this and thinking, oh my God, what have I got myself into? Like, I don't even know if I can make lemonade given lemons and sugar. And this company expects me to make lemonade out of thin air. I don't, I don't know how to do that. But it set the bar really high, and it gives you some idea of the aspiration of that company and the culture of that company. So I thought I'd put that in there.
Hey Fletch, can I jump in and ask a question?
Sure.
Just might also get the ball rolling with people thinking they can jump in and ask the question. I mean, do you think that seems like a great idea to me at the really early stage of the company to say, hey, what's our culture? You know, we can start thinking about, oh, this is our product, or this is what we do, or this is what we need to work on. I feel like culture might be something that could get a little lost early on. I mean, do you think it's something people should really focus on and go, hey, who do we want to be as opposed to what do we want to be?
It's a really good question, and culture is really important, right? Culture is your operating system for your company, right? Culture is what people do when you're not in the room, um, and it's a how your culture is the decisions that people make when presented with a choice of like how they behave with each other. I have a choice about how I behave with you, or I have a choice about how I behave with a customer, or I have a choice about how I like allocate resources. Right? And your culture is the thing that makes you understand what is the right choice and what is the wrong choice. Um, it's easy to not be deliberate about that in the early days because your early days might be 1 to 5 people in a room and you're all inside each other's heads and you know what the right thing to do is, and there's a culture there and it doesn't require any real framework, any real structure, right? You get it. But when it comes to scaling, like when you get to that product market fit, and okay, it's like, okay, now we need to bring in another 5 employees, another 10 employees. And things are getting really busy because customers are buying the product, and now you've got to do customer support, and now you've got to accelerate that extra feature that you're building, or you've got to find new manufacturing space, or you got to, all of these things start to really take up your time and your mental bandwidth. And you're like, oh, I need to hire that person, I need to hire that person, and you bring them in, and they weren't part of that initial 5, so they haven't downloaded your culture, and they don't have, unless you've been deliberate about this, they don't then have the framework to understand what is the right way to behave with my coworkers, what is the right way to behave with a customer, what is the right way to allocate resources. So it's something that you set in your startup phase, although it pays dividends in your scaling phase. It pays dividends down the track. So like number 1 in startup land, right? You've got to survive. Survival is number 1. Your goal is to get the product market fit. So investing a lot of time and effort into being really deliberate about what your cultural values are, it has to come second to getting to product market fit. Otherwise, you'll have a great culture and no business. But if you do have that extra bit of time, if you do have the capacity to sit down and go, right, what is important? What are the trade-offs for us, strategically? What are our trade-offs? And what is the culture that is responsive to that set of trade-offs? Like, are we customer first? Does the customer always come first, or do we? Like, is it actually more important that the technology gets the investment? Like, it is worthwhile doing that. I was engaged with a startup over here that was still only 10 people strong, but one of their first 10 hires was a head of people and culture, because it was an experienced founder, and he had enough funding to bring that role in. So he was lucky. He could invest in that role, and he had investors who also appreciated the role that culture plays in the latter success of a business. And so they got to be very deliberate about it. Now, the Uber experience, like Uber didn't launch its 14 cultural values until early 2016. Uber was founded in late 2009. So it actually had a period of 5 to 6 years where the culture wasn't officially documented, but it was still very strong, and there were other tactics that they had in place without actually having the list, right? There were still other tactics, and we'll touch on these actually, that they had in place without going here is the 14 things that we have on the wall. 14 seems like a lot, but Uber had 14, Amazon I think has 14, It's kind of seems to be a magic number. So it's worth, and your first 3 to 5 hires will also define the culture of your company. So it's so important to get those right if you can, fully appreciating that, once again, the name of the game is survival. And you may be left with decisions when you're starting out, right? Of, do I hire the person with low EQ, but who's super good at X? Or do I hire the person with high EQ, but is quite mediocre at X? Because the person who's awesome at that thing, that skill set I need, and also has a great EQ, and also just kind of fits with my vision for this, that person doesn't want to risk their livelihood on your startup, right? Is a very real kind of, like, it's easy to sit here and say, oh, you just need to hire A players. It's like, that's great. But what about when the A players don't want to work for you? I think is the reality of the startup world. And that's the kind of first set of trade-offs that you make that will define your culture as a startup. It's also the first set of fires that you make as well. Like, that is probably even more important in terms of setting your culture. Is who do you hire and who do you fire? Who gets promoted and for what reasons? It's what you do is who you are, to quote Ben Horowitz on this topic, the venture capitalist. Like, so it's, you can come up with your 14 values and you can put them on the wall, but it's what you do. It's, are you okay with the time taken to respond to a customer support request slipping out 1, 2, 3 days? Or do you say, no, we will all drop what we're doing and we will all get into the customer support channel, and we will all, as a business, like, never let that number go above 24 hours. You know, those are the things that you can put customer obsession up as one of your values. But if you don't back it up with, like, I know you're doing important work in tech, and I know you're doing important work in product, and I know you're doing important work in ops, but guess what? Everybody is dropping what they're doing, and we are all getting into Zendesk, and we're all answering the customer support queries that are coming in, because that is the most important fire for us right now. And so it's what you do and who you bring in. So I hope that's kind of waffling, but does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think that's great. Thanks, Fletch.
Cool.
Good quotes in there.
So I just, like, sort of on that, so Uber's culture was very all in, always on. Really, so it, and that was what it needed to be. It needed to be. So just on that, it's like, the context of Uber was, it's a low margin business. It's a high volume business, and it's in a hyper competitive industry. Like, my base advice to any and every founder is, don't enter into hyper competitive industries, right? Don't try and be a disruptor. That is an inherently bad strategy. But then every now and then there is kind of special individuals. I think Travis, for all his faults, we're all flawed human beings, including Travis. Travis Kalanick, the founder of Uber, Travis and Garrett, but Travis was the one who stayed on and pushed it forward. He's the kind of guy, I'll give you some color here. Like, he got perfect scores on the SATs, right? It's like perfect scores on the HSC. He didn't just get perfect scores on the HSC. He built a business out of teaching other people how to get perfect scores on the American equivalent of the HSC. For him, it was just a game. It was just a competition. And he was like, I can win. I will win this. It's not a big life event. It says, I'm going to win at the SATs. And then I'm going to sell my ability to other people. He must have been, like, I don't know, 17, 18 at the time, maybe 16 at the time. He then built a business, like a file sharing business, that was you basically exploiting an aspect of Windows at the time to kind of like the file sharing pirate stuff. He's building a business out of that peer-to-peer. And then he got sued by the recording. He was 20, I think. He got sued by the Recording Industry Association. And as he was negotiating investment of millions of dollars, that shut down his investment. So he then built a revenge company, which he then ended up selling into the recording, like some major labels in the recording industry. So he's a very super competitive, hyper intelligent, super competitive type of individual. So going into a hyper competitive market for him actually makes a lot of sense. But for everyone else, I'd say find a niche. Don't compete. Like, don't be a disruptor. Don't take on incumbents. If you can avoid it, like, do something new and different. Create new value. Unless you are that hyper competitive, all in, always on. And he hired people. Like, his first few hires were all in, always on type people. And when you joined Uber, it took over your life, right? At that time, very different company today. I should point that out. This is not reflective of what Uber is today. It's moved on to a business that is far more sustainable in terms of its work practices, and has matured as businesses need to do. But it was a business that you had to integrate it into your life. If you wanted to live a life, you had to integrate a life. So that, like, that top left photo, and you're dealing with the mothership, you're dealing with people in all sorts of time zones. So you, at all hours of the day, you're engaging with people. So you'd be like, myself and my ops managers are like, well, look, we need to go and do something healthy. Let's go to the driving range. But like, I'm just going to jump on a call quickly with such and such in San Fran. So literally, this is someone taking a screenshot of me and sending it to me of us golfing a driving range in Perth, while also still working, like working at the beach. We would hire Airbnbs and or fly. Like, if we had a group of us who were working on a similar kind of problem, like, we just hire an Airbnb, right? Everyone get on a plane. We're going to, this is Melbourne. We're going to Melbourne and we're going to solve this problem. Like 3 days, just hard. And of course, Friday, Saturday nights, like, that's when you're doing, that's like the biggest time in terms of trips for Uber. So you Friday, Saturday nights, like, you wouldn't dare be too far away from your computer. Because if I had done something as an operations manager that meant that trips weren't happening, right? There's like 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people, or the Australia-wide stuff, like 5,000, 10,000 people's livelihoods depend on them being able to drive on a Friday, Saturday night and connect with riders. So you just figure out, how do I have a little life and but also make sure that, like, I'm constantly always on. And so that was the nature of that kind of business. My advice for anyone who wants to live a more balanced life is find a high margin, low competition space to go into so that you don't have to live like this. But that said, we had a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun because we took a very different approach. Our approach was, we are not a cab company. And how do we convince people we're not a cab company? We do fun things. We did UberICECREAM, like Fletcher Young UberICECREAM. We did UberPUPPIES. These are the puppies chilling out in our office after a day of being driven around and patted by people, with all the funds there being raised going to the pound, or the dog home. But actually getting out and delivering ice cream to people. We had a truck. That photo there is a truck that we drove around the city, which had, like, free ice cream. Download the app, use that code. And as the truck drove around, like, I could see on my computer screen people opening the app. Like, you could see them popping up on a map. So that sort of, and it was blasting out the green sleeves. We'd done like a modern version of green sleeves playing out there. So it was like the ice cream truck's coming. Only it was like, get out your phone, not your wallet. And so doing things like that. And then on the bottom right hand side is we ran Uber choppers. So you press a button, car turns up, takes you to a spot, and you had a joy ride in a chopper for stunts like this. Also got to do things like delivered real emojis. So we made, like, the donut emoji. If you clicked on a donut emoji, you got actual donuts that turned up. Things like this. We delivered cricket umpires for 3 overs of cricket, backyard cricket, on Australia Day, I think in 2016. So it was a real culture of challenging the status quo. And of course, work hard, play hard. So it's a very play hard sort of culture. We'd pull the whole company together from time to time. like literally 5,000 people in one spot. And we actually had like a Beyonce perform for us as a group, things like that. So it was that, this was kind of peak Uber. It was crazy days. Not for me now where I'm in my life stage, but it was a great experience for all its kind of faults. So just a few lessons from that experience. I think number one takeaway here is best beats first. And when I say best, it doesn't necessarily mean best product. It's just best at the thing that's most important. So UberX, so Uber started with Uber Black. Like Uber started with black town cars. Like in the US, they were Lincolns. Over in Australia, they were like Caprices, and like Caprice isn't made anymore, but now they're the S-Class Mercedes type things, right? It was always conceived, like the initial conception of it was, those cars are driving around, they get used once or twice a day, they're very expensive, they're just underutilized. So why don't we just build an app, give it to the drivers, and then for a similar price to a taxi, you get a black car. And that's what it was launched with. There was no idea initially about anybody getting into anybody else's car, a Prius. Yeah, it was just, that was not the idea. Then Lyft came in the US, and Lyft came out with a low cost product, right? This was the, like anyone can sort of sign up and anyone can give anyone else a lift and get paid. And Uber thought this was like, Travis and co thought this was crazy, like you're going to get shut down. And it took a year and a few letters to the San Francisco or the California Public Utilities Commission, which regulates taxis, to sort of say, well, if you don't shut Lyft down, we're going to launch a similar product. And so it was 12 months later that UberX launched for the first time. So Uber was not first to market. It was slow to market with what we now come to understand as Uber, which is UberX. But the thing is, over that period of time, it launched Uber Black in, 30, 40 cities, whereas Lyft had only launched in a couple of cities. So what it got really good at was launching. It got really good at getting that first initial process of getting the first cars, the first supply on the road, and then the first riders. And so by the time it hit, basically took the Lyft style product, took the UberX, the more accessible product on, it was able to run so much faster. It got really good as well at, let's say, making distributed decisions. And so it was able to move so much faster. So it wasn't that the Uber product or the Uber app was significantly better than the Lyft. In fact, Lyft led from a tech development perspective in a number of aspects, and product development perspective on a number of aspects. But Uber got really good at kind of the things that mattered. Right? A slightly better app doesn't matter, but a more reliable experience, right? A safe, reliable, affordable experience, and getting into market early in this context matters. And so that's why it was best at that. And that's why today it's in, 800 cities, and Lyft's only in like 2 countries. So best beats first. So it's like, don't worry if your competitors are out there. If you figure the thing out that matters and they haven't figured it out, then you don't need to be first to market, right? You just need to be best to market. Another thing Uber did really well that as part of that process was Travis was able to be in the room without being in the room, right? And as you grow your organization, you want to ensure that good decisions are being made. Culture is a key way of doing that. But it was just, when I reflect now, I'm like, at all times we sort of knew, right? The employee base generally knew what would Travis do in this situation, right? If Travis knew what I knew, and if Travis was here right now, he would do this. If I had to make a choice about, do I focus on reliability of like press a button, get a ride, or do I worry about the PR fallout of surge being too high? I just knew Travis would go reliability. Don't worry about the PR. Reliability. People press a button, they get a car. Like that's what's important. And so, you didn't need rules. You didn't need procedures. You just knew. And there were certain tactics that helped enable that, right? So one was over communication, right? It was just like there was an all hands for the entire company every week, an hour-long thing. There'd be presentations. Travis would be available for founder Q&A live, and the expectation was that if you couldn't, because it was in Australia time, it was like 3 a.m. But it would always be recorded and available for 7 days afterwards. And the expectation was you watched it. Right? You didn't miss the all hands. The knowledge sharing infrastructure, right? So like the wikis, kind of like we had our own intranet, the availability of knowledge on that internet and how live it was, how it was always updated, and you could interact with people in Sao Paulo or Madrid or San Fran who were trying new things, doing new things, learning new things, and then immediately adding it into these like knowledge bases. Was I had never come across it before. It was just it was incredible. So it was like the moment someone learned something, the rest of the company knew it. 24 hours later. Structured hiring. Uber got really good at understanding the kinds of people who were good at particularly launching or coming in early stage, and it tested for those attributes and hired people with those attributes. Became very good at onboarding, so that you absorb that culture faster through their onboarding processes. When you join the company, everyone gets flown to San Francisco for a week, and you download the culture and you download the decision-making frameworks into your head, and then you go out into the marketplace, and you are then more likely to make good decisions. Like, I say good decisions, I mean decisions that Travis would want you to make. So things like that really helped. Very clear objectives, very clear metrics. Clarity is kind. It's kind of like, if you take one thing away from this, it's like clarity is kind. We're always really clear on, am I doing a good job or not? You can tell. And that, the key metric for us was trips. And trips, and if you're in a operations perspective, trips come from cars. So you get cars on the road. Cars on the road. And this was the first time that we got 1,000 cars online at once. Yeah, it was just like literally popping the champagne at that point. So you just you knew you were doing a good job, and if you had 1,000 cars on there, you knew, and you only had 800 cars last week, you knew this week was going to have more trips than last week, and that's what matters. And this is also one of the things that really defines, that ties into culture as well, because I got to work over here with a fellow who was quite senior at a company called Free Now, which is like Uber for taxis in Europe. And their key metric wasn't trips. Their key metric was gross bookings. So like money flowing through. And so they made decisions to do things like, we want to preference trips to the airport because they're higher value trips. Whereas at Uber, we weren't interested in high value trips. We're interested in more trips. So we made a different set of decisions. We wanted to lower prices, and try and increase the utilization and increase the reliability. So the metrics you choose, right, also tie into culture and then the decisions that get made. So it's be strategic about that, and I think Uber hammered that home for me. And then this kind of idea of scrappiness was part of the Uber experience. And I'm thinking back about scrappiness. Really, it was about being lean. And we'll talk a little bit more about lean in the time we have, without knowing it. All right. So just to give you some practical examples, like enter a market, you onboard your first 10 drivers. Okay, we'll do that one by one on their time. And then we need to onboard the next 100 drivers, right? We need to get them to download the app, we need to get their insurance papers, need to get their driver's license, like teach them how to use it. And so we go individuals, first 10, and then we'd run small batches to get to that 100, and we need to get to 1,000. So we'd start doing larger batches. And then we needed to be able to have like almost hundreds a week cycling through. And that's when we invested in basically having a production line of people who were able to, you come in anytime, have a flow of people throughout the day coming in and onboarding as drivers. So we had to, and at Uber that evolution was about 12 months in a market, right? It was super fast. So as soon as you built a process, you broke the process. and you went to the new one. And so, but you always just focused on like the next milestone. Well, I just need the next milestone. I didn't worry about making it perfect. Like you just worried about doing the least amount of work to get to the point I need to get to. And then for rider acquisition, it was similar. We started out handing out flyers at train stations to get the first, you got to get the first 1,000 riders. So just flyers. Like we don't need to do fancy campaigns or billboards. Let's literally, we can just print out some flyers and get out there and wear a t-shirt that says Uber and hand it out and say, hey, here's this thing, it's called Uber, you should use it, here's a free code. Things like stunts as well, completely inside our control. You could run them. They create virality, guerrilla marketing. The stunts really part of that. Then you start getting into the more sophisticated, targeted social media, paid social media spending. And then, you know, now Uber does big fancy campaigns, spends millions of dollars on TV ads and things like that. So it's always was just like, we just need to get to the first 1,000 riders. We just need to get to the first 5,000 riders. Like what is the least amount of work we can do to get to that point? And we never thought of it as lean. We called it Scrappy, but it was really an adaptation of lean principles. So a few observations here. Uber had amazing clarity of objectives and measures, a razor sharp focus on what was important. The culture was, I think, coherent with the strategy, right? And coherent with the context, coherent with a hyper-competitive market. They hired hyper-competitive people, put them in a hyper-competitive environment, and was able to win in a hyper-competitive market. So that made sense. Worth pointing out here is the solution to every problem tends to sow the seeds for the next problem. So, you know, Uber has well-documented behavioral issues, right? And that's partly because the context of the business changed, but the people didn't, and the nature of those people didn't. So those, and it happened so fast as well, that and that sort of contributed to some of the behavioral issues that Uber saw, and ultimately kind of led to the transition of CEOs. But worth noting that something that's the right decision is the right decision for a period of time, and then it can become the wrong decision very rapidly. Easy to tell in hindsight, hard to know at the time. Scrappiness was an expectation. Knowledge became currency in that business, which is like, it was like you were celebrated if you found out something new and you shared it with everyone. And that really pushed a culture of knowledge sharing and continuous improvement. And fast decentralized decision-making was enabled by 1, the culture, 2, the over communication, 3, the clear objectives, and 4, that knowledge sharing. So that was really important for that rapid scaling, that blitz scaling, which was important for that business. But I want to highlight, it may not be important for yours. But it's important. The thing is to figure out what are those key drivers. Just in terms of lean, once again, I highlighted this in my first. It's like, what is the least amount of work we can do to learn the next most important thing? That's from a thing called the Lean UX Canvas, which, if you haven't covered that before, it's a good thing to Google and work your way through. But there's kind of 2 elements of it that are really important, and that's number 1. It's like least amount of work to do the next most important thing. I won't go into this too much, but the whole idea of lean, and when I talk about lean, I'm also talking about theory of constraints, even though they're technically different, came from manufacturing, like Henry Ford, production line, like amazing. This is a whole new thing. The amazing thing about the production line was not the specialization, I would say, of the individuals putting the wheels on and stuff like that. It was the fact that the flow of materials was fixed. And so you only brought materials into the process once a material left the process. It was pull, and that meant you kept your inventory low and you kept your work in progress control. That was the major leap there. And then you had Taiichi Uno at Toyota, who developed the Toyota production system, which similar sort of concept. They use this idea of Kanban, similar sort of like different approach to a production line, similar sort of idea. And then software developers started to steal these concepts and bring them to software development. And you know, this underlies things like the Agile manifesto. People talk about Agile a lot. I won't go into detail this on Agile because I'm not an Agile practitioner per se. But like at the time when the Agile manifesto was written in 2001, like this was kind of like groundbreaking ideas. Now it's kind of table stakes. And then Eric Ries came along and he wrote the Lean Startup, which stole some of these ideas, these manufacturing ideas, and turned them into like venture building ideas. I've got two books here. So the Lean Startup, which everybody knows, and then The Goal, which probably no one knows. The Goal was written in 1984. It's still a great book though, and I think it's got nothing to do with like tech or startups per se, but it does teach you in a very interesting way, kind of a Socratic kind of way, these principles that underlie this lean approach to venture building. I'll just give you a quick overview of them. Right. So when I think about a startup, right, the goal is to get to product market fit. Problem solution fit, right? I've identified a problem, a group of you people who experience that problem. I've come up with a solution. I've productized that solution. Now, is there a market that's willing to pay for it? And a channel through which I can reach that market, right? That's your goal, get to product market fit. Throughput, if you think about this in a manufacturing kind of mind frame, throughput is anything that moves you closer to product market fit. Your work in progress is anything that you've started but not finished, in that sort of ends of getting towards, what that means of getting towards the goal. Waste is anything that you've worked on and spent any time on that doesn't move you closer to the goal. And a constraint is anything that reduces your throughput. So anything that's stopping you from moving closer to your goal or slowing you down. So your job, like if you think about it from that perspective, and I'm an engineer, so I tend to think about it from a process perspective, but it's to get to product market fit, you know, with your concept, to iterate through to product market fit as quickly as possible by maximizing your throughput and minimizing waste. And that's what lean, that's what whole build, measure, learn cycle is about. It's like build your MVP, learn from it, iterate, and then go again. The thing about lean is it doesn't explicitly tell you what to learn. And the thing about the theory of constraints and the goal book teaches you about is like how do you know what to learn? How do you know what should be testing? And that's what the Lean UX canvas actually does help with that, right? Which is what is the most important thing you need to learn first. So identify, like if you haven't done this already with your venture, you need to identify what is the riskiest assumptions? What are all of the assumptions I'm making? What's the riskiest? What's the one that if it turns out to be false, the whole idea gets sunk? If you can identify that, and then like what is the least amount of work we need to do to learn the next most important thing? Because you know that is what moves you closer to the goal. That is your unit of output. That's your unit of throughput. And then one of the key ideas here is to try and keep it as small as possible. Keep your batch sizes small. So lean venture building is all about taking these concepts from lean manufacturing that were learned in the 1950s and applying them to building a venture, to entrepreneurship, to try and speed it up and to try and minimize waste really and risk. So just quickly, beyond that, a few lessons I've learned from being here in the UK is beware premature scaling. So it's the #1 cause of startup failure. What is premature scaling? It's when you decide to employ a bunch of people or spend a bunch of money without actually having product market fit, without having that market there ready to buy your product, wanting to buy your product. So I think it was like a great example I came across here was Pause. Pause was disrupting the market for dog food. The market did not need disruption. The market was not overserviced by the existing providers of dog food, and dog food delivered to your home was not a groundbreaking proposition. And they scaled. They built this beautiful office. All of the like cables in the office were chew-proof. Like you had dogs running around everywhere. They hired 30, 40, 50, 60 people, spent a whole lot of money, no market to support that product. And it's no longer around today, pause. But I also learned a lot about how to make a great dog-friendly office. And yeah, like Blipper. Blipper is still around today. Blipper is an example of a company where the market was there actually, right? But they built a cost base that was equivalent to like the Apollo program, right? They built a cost base for going to the moon, but the market was low Earth orbit. So they completely overshot, and so that, you know, so that they built, it was actually a good small to medium-sized enterprise there to be built, but they got funding and they built a cost base to try and build this unicorn. And it got to unicorn status, not a unicorn anymore. And so that's the other thing, is like how big is your market really? Because you could have a really good business, it just might not be a unicorn. And yeah, so it's really interesting there. In terms of getting the product market fit, I got this quote from Mark Andreessen, sort of saying, like, this is what it feels like when you don't yet quite have it. A16Z, or Mark Andreessen and Horowitz. So Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz, I've got a whole tome of information about product market fit, what it is, how you can try and determine if you've got it. I won't talk too much about it. Worth having a look. And then, yeah, just like, there's a lot of hype around blitzscaling. If you don't need to blitzscale, don't. Blitzscaling, if you're not sure what blitzscaling is, it's basically doing things that would ordinarily be considered dumb, but actually make a lot of sense in a given context, because you're in some sort of winner-takes-all market, or it's like losing money on your first 1 million customers, right? Ordinarily a bad idea, but if those first 1 million customers unlock 10 million more customers that you can make a profit on, it's a good idea. So blitzscale. Don't. It's kind of like, don't be a disruptor and don't blitzscale if you don't have to. These ideas get romanticized, but they actually only work. They're the exception, not the rule. Get good before you get big, which again, that's that best beats first idea. And it's just like, figure out what is the right messaging. Like, there's this period, I think what I'm talking about here is this period of like, oh wait, it seems like we've got product market fit. Should we put the pedal to the metal, go raise a bunch of money, hire a bunch of people? It's like, actually, if you've got time, take a breath. Take a breath and figure out why you have product market fit. Figure out what is the right channel for reaching people. What messaging is actually working for them. Iterate on that a bit before you put the pedal to the metal. And there's no like name for this period of time between like product market fit and scaling, but I think it's actually a really important period of time to like get fit before you run the race. Uber had it sort of forced on it, and it actually got really good at a few things before it kicked off UberX, and then went like, you know, hockey stick. So if you've got that time, you know, use that time, because like the more employees you add, the more customers you add, things just get harder. So if you've got some time to build some infrastructure before you do that, then do it. This is saying exactly the same thing, right? Which is focus. Like, you've got the product market fit. Now you need to refine. Like, it's a refinement piece. First refine, then invest in growth, then invest in scale. If I can sum this up in one thing. And then once you got there, then you can look at spinning out the next product. It's like, focus on, okay, we've got product, people are buying it, people want it, people are talking about it. Let's figure out exactly why, refine that, tune it, right? Then we'll go after growth. And then we'll invest in whatever infrastructure we need for scaling, right? So it's like, get really good at it, then invest in the marketing, then invest in the customer support. Like, there is a logical flow here. If you try and do it all at once, it will stretch you. So key ideas from this session. The goal is to get the product market fit. Best speeds first. Project yourself through the organization, using culture as an operating system. Decentralized decision making is important if you're in an area where you need to grow quickly. Otherwise, you can be the kind of dictator at the top if you want. So that's some key ideas. So just to wrap up, take a step forward. What is this? Okay, so you kind of need to pick your medicine. So I've dealt with, like I've been in MBA classes and I've been dealing with founders. And it seems like this kind of bifurcates into two different types of mindsets. And one is the just do stuff, ready, shoot, aim kind of mindset. And the other one is just ready, aim kind of mindset. And so there's two pieces of advice that you need to get. Now, the fact that a lot of you are here means that you know, it's kind of like people at the MBA, like me, studying entrepreneurship. It's like, why are you doing an MBA studying entrepreneurship? Just get out there and do it. So the advice that like I need and maybe you need is that everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. So just get out there and start doing stuff. Whereas the advice that I give to a lot of the more naturally entrepreneurial people, you know, that I've had to engage with is actually there is a benefit to sharpening the axe and taking a breath and figuring out what's working and why it's working. All right, so it's like blue pill, red pill. Naturally entrepreneurial sort of people, it's like take a step back. Like as Abraham Lincoln says, give me 6 hours to chop down a tree. I will spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. The naturally entrepreneurial people hate sharpening the axe. People like me love sharpening the axe. We sharpen it too much. We've got to start swinging at some point. So I say that understand your psychology and where you sit. And I take a step forward because I had a professor who taught entrepreneurship class, and he kept coming back to this. He kept coming back to like this image and this video. And this is the like Felix, I think his name is. He's the supersonic dive from the edge of space. It's like parachute. This is a parachute. He's parachuting to Earth from the edge of space. If you're not familiar with this, and you know, if you watch this full-length video, like they go up and they're going through a checklist. You know, there's this, okay, like check that this is working, check that that's working. Okay, disconnect from the main oxygen supply. Okay, unlock hatch, open hatch, and then they get to this point where the hatch is open. Like take a step outside, and then there's this. The next item on the checklist is take a step forward. And so people like me, you know, we can study every case study, we can attend sessions like this, we can learn all we want to do, but at the end of the day, you've still got to take a step forward. That is still the point. And then you know, you're in free fall at that point, but you got to do it because everything else is kind of a waste up until that point that you take that step forward. I think that was a really powerful idea. So that is me for now. I've actually got to run.
Wow, Fletch, thank you so much. I know you have to run, and I was watching the clock and like I was like, I should be jumping in and telling Fletch he's got to go. So we will let you go to your meeting. If people have any questions, can they like send them to me? Like if anyone wants to follow up on anything, is that?
That's absolutely fine. Yeah. Shoot them through to Ali. Ali can follow up, and I'm happy to discuss any of this if any of it was confusing or you need more color. Happy to provide clarification. So thanks very much, Ali. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Hope that was useful.
We'll catch up, and you go to your
okay.
What time it is over there? 9 o'clock. All right.
Yeah. Cheers. Okay. See you, everyone.